So this is a quick video on replacing brake discs and pads on a vehicle. This is on a Freelander too, but essentially it's the same for every other car. So first of all, before I've done anything, what I've done is I've freed off this little disc retaining bolt here. I'll show you how to do that in a second. I've also freed this off just for ease on the video. But all you do is clean off the nut, spray some penetrating fluid down it, give it a bit of a rub over with a wire brush, and then you can free it off. So first of all, if you're doing this job on your own and at home, the easiest thing to do here, this is a 6mm X bolt. Before you do anything else, especially if you're on your own, you'll need the caliper. Get a spanner, put it in between the two bolts like that and on top of the caliper, and then what that will allow you to do is free this off without the disc moving around. So the next thing that we want to do is to remove the caliper itself from the carrier. Now these plastic plugs here are what hide some 7mm Allen bolts. Which is essentially this. Goes inside there. Again, as I say, I've freed these off, and what that will allow me to do is pull the caliper off. Now there's plenty of meat on these pads, but the reason I'm doing the replacement is because of all the scars on the discs, and that they're worn as well and warped. But as I say, first job is to remove these bolts off this caliper here. Now what you've got to be careful of on any brakes is this bleed nipple here. As you can see, it's extremely close to catching on the ratchet. Now what I tend to do is start at this point, just so that you know that you're not going to accidentally catch it when you go that way. Now, as you hear the note change in the way the ratchet sounds, that's when you know you're free, hence why I can wobble this as much as I can. And what that's done is remove this part here, this little pin, which is what the caliper slides on the carrier. Now what you may wish to do is to get a screwdriver, pop it at the top there, and that will allow you to pull the caliper away from the carrier on the disc. Now these are going to be tight inside because it's obviously pushed on with brake pressure, and what you're going to find is that the front caliper will stay and this will come off with the The rear one will come up with the caliper. It's nothing to worry about. It's because it's got some guide pins in, but I'll show you what they are. What you're going to want to do is to remove this. Easiest way to do it is with a screwdriver and pop it off like that. It's got some tiny little hooks here that allow it to fix into the little grooves in here to locate it, and that will make it easier to pull the caliper off. So as you can see, front pad has stayed, plenty of meat on it, but it is starting to get the grooves from the disc, and replacing these as well as the disc is the best thing to do, because if you put new discs on, it'll just shape to those pads. And then there's little clips that fit inside the caliper itself. Now as you can see from this caliper, the rubber boot is wearing away. That's going to need to be replaced, which I will do at a later point. Now what you're going to need is something like this, but a cable tie will do, some string, whatever as well, as long as it is enough to keep the caliper hung up out the way, like so, just so you don't put any undue pressure on this pipe here. So once you have the caliper itself out of the way, what you're going to want to do now is to remove these two bolts to pull this carrier off. Now on this particular car, they're a 17mm, but for some reason there's so much rust and swelling on these that they become an 18. And as you can see, it is a bit loose. But again, I've freed these off earlier for ease on the video. So once you get those two big bolts out, that will essentially allow you to remove this carrier here. Now, one thing that people tend not to do, and a lot of videos show, tell me you're not a mechanic without being a mechanic, and telling me saying that, is clean these parts off and grease them up, because that is where the pads will guide in, and this needs to be free, otherwise it can cause your calipers to stick. So the easiest way to do that is to just simply get a wire brush and just give them a bit of a clean. This gets all the loose rust off and makes it a nice smooth path for the pad to slide through. Now, because we removed this earlier, this should just pull away. Now, this has been maintained quite well because it has the smooth surface with the copper grease on, but sometimes you have to hit the disc top and bottom to get it off. But don't worry about damaging it, because you are going to replace it. What I'll do now is just give this a bit of a clean up, put some fresh copper grease on before we put the new disc on. and all I'm doing here is spraying a bit of brake clean on it and giving it a wipe just to clean the surface off a little, just with the old grease. Now, amateurs might not notice, but the more seasoned people will. There's no stone guard here. That will be getting replaced at another day, but this again is just to show how to replace the discs and pads. So all you want to do is just get some copper grease and just rub it onto these surfaces here. All this does in future when you come to replace your discs is just stop it from sticking as bad, or for the rust to form in between and creating a barrier for you to get round in the future, because essentially it'll just become one with the hub. So once we're at this point, and it's a little bit of a nuance with the Freelander too, but it will happen on some cars, I'm going to have to wind this back with a caliper rewind tool, which is this. What you do is, this sits inside here. I normally use a spanner on one of these, and you should be able to tighten it and push the piston back in. Now the other side was a little bit stiff, and what I ended up doing was having to turn the engine on just to give me that bit of brake assistance. So essentially what that does is increases this gap here, so the new disc and new pads can fit in snugly over there. Now these new discs I'm putting on are uprated discs. They are terra firma. They have drill holes in to allow gases to escape, and slits or grooves to clean the pad face off to stop it glazing. What you're going to want to do with all discs is to use some brake and clutch cleaner on the surface, give it a wipe to get any excess grease off that stopped it rusting after the manufacturing process. And that applies to both sides of the disc. So what we need to do now is this little part here, where the screw came out of, just to line it up with this part on the disc. And it should just slide on. Now I've got a screw removed earlier, which we can fasten up, remembering this was a 6mm Allen bolt. And this is essentially a disc retaining screw. Just give it a bit of a nip for now, and we can fasten it properly later. Next stage is to put the carrier back on And as I said, we've cleaned these grooves off. We're going to want to put some grease in just to help the pads slide a little bit better and not seize. You don't need much, and try not to get on the insides because that's where your disc is. Very dangerous. So as you can see, it's just in that little groove there. Same on this side and same on the top. As I said earlier, a lot of people make videos saying, tell me you're not a mechanic, without telling me you're not a mechanic. And when doing brakes, this is the thing that people miss out all the time. And that's how you get sticky calipers. It's not the only reason, but one of them. As I say, you don't need much, just enough to make the caliper and the pad slide freely. And again, this is an anti-seizing compound. So refitting is just the reverse of removal. Pop this over the right way, which is this way, over the new disc, and just pop the original bolts back in. I think it's time for a new glove. So, new glove, uncovered thumb. I'll be getting my tea soon, I don't want it to be dirty. Now what you'll want to do is get your torque specs for these bolts as well as these when you're doing it. I'll not do anything in relation to torquing just yet, I'm just simply fitting this for the purposes of the video to show you how it's done. So once we're at this stage, we now want to get our two new pads. First and easiest one is the front one. It's different to the back when it has no prongs on it. You can't mix them up. This is always the first outside one. And as you can see where we've greased it, this is where the actual pad itself runs. Same on the top. What we then need to do is get our caliper down, making sure none of the pipes have been twisted or kinked overly whilst doing it. And then we pop the new pad with the prongs into the actual caliper itself. So again, this stays on the caliper, this one goes on the caliper carrier, and we should just be able to slide it over when I push the bolt slides back in. just these are getting in the way. So you should now end up with this view where you can see the pads are level with the outside of the disc itself. So what we want to do now is fasten these two slide pins back up. What I would always do is put the top one in very slightly, just enough to secure it, and then we can start to fit the bottom one. Again, you'll need to find your torque specs for your vehicle, but I'm just tightening these up. Again, remembering the bleed nipple. So now, once we're at this stage, come around the front, we need to relocate the bracket in here. As I said, a couple of little hooks, they need to be placed along here. Easiest way to do it is put these top and bottom pieces on first, and you can bend the middle. And that is now clipped and located. Don't forget to remove your hook from your suspension. What you want to do now is make sure this is tight. So reverse of how we did it. So spanner in between the two studs. A little Allen bolt. And just give it a nip up. What you now need to do is get into the vehicle, pump the brakes until they're hard, because then that will take up the slack in the pads. Once that's done, again, check your torque settings, and that's essentially how to do discs and pads on any kind of vehicle really. If you need to know how to take wheels off, put wheels on, watch my other video.